the spring, where we will try to look a little bit internal by having people internally and externally look at us, and maybe the future of what we want to be, what we could be, what we are not yet, but maybe what we can become. So as you look through the list of speakers that we have a kind of an eclectic mix of people, as I said, from the inside the department, also from within the college. We will continue this theme of what could natural resources be that it is not yet, if we need to change in the spring as well. Again, it will be a mix of people that speak from within the department, from within the university, and from the outside. The people that are, if you don't like what we're doing, the people responsible for that, me, Jim, and Marianne, who didn't show up today because she was afraid of the response or so. We had your nominations, and some we accepted and some we rejected. So no offense taken. Hopefully we can weave these people in at a later time as it is appropriate. This will be my last year, as you saw in the note. So if there's somebody who is itching to do the seminar series, please come forward and let Marianne know to do that after the spring series is over. We will try to maintain call it a tradition maybe, that we started last year, of having events after the speakers are done to go to somebody's house and have a little get-together to discuss what was presented to us during the formal time of the seminar. Dan Decker has volunteered today to host Max and whoever wants to come in and participate in trashing his house. Hopefully not. And it's at 320 Old Gorge Road, and you can access that through Southwoods and East King Road. So if you have difficulties, you know how to Google and find his location. 320 Old Gorge Road. And we start somewhere between 5:30 and 6. If you come later, everything will be cold or gone. That's your choice. You saw in the list, those of you that have received the lineup of the speakers, there's a couple of people that have volunteered to host. I'm not going to twist arms this year. That was getting tired or tiresome last year. So if you feel you want to host one of the speakers and want to open your house as a friendly venue to discuss this afterwards, please let me know, and we will put you into the schedule. That's as far as I want to go today, with just introducing the theme and what we want to do over the fall and the spring. So it's my pleasure to introduce Max Pfeffer today. He's going to kick this all off with what we call the grand vision. So when we were thinking about self-reflection in the future, and we have talked in various venues about what this place could become, not this room in particular, but natural resources, us as a department, as a college, we thought, who should we actually ask to do and deliver that? And so Max's name was dropped on us, and we thought a little bit about it and said, well, yeah. He was sitting in a room, and we were still inhabiting Furno, and he was listening to us of what we were trying to do and what the different strands of ideas were. And with him sitting in the dean's office, it's also a good place for him to think about our future, because he will have some say in it. So why not us listening to him, what he has to say in his role as a dean, although he's not speaking as a dean, he's speaking as an individual with a vision that he himself developed, obviously informed by his dean's role, as well as his role as an academic scholar and a participant in our conversation. So we're looking forward to that. But before he gets started, I want to at least give a couple of the credentials that he had in a very short list that I kind of shortened even further. So right now, Max is the International Professor of Development Sociology, and he's the Senior Associate Dean of CALS. He had a couple of other directorships, some more or less successful before, right? So, and one was as the Associate Director of the Cornell University Ag Experiment Station, and then I guess the one that was closed down was the Center for the Environment, although as of Phoenix, out for the ashes, we have ACSF now. So those are 2 other directorships. His teaching that he mentioned is really looking at environmental sociology and sociological theory. His research that he does largely around New York and in Central America, there are 2 focal points in that is really rural labor markets, international migration, and land use and environmental planning. And that's also something where he has been involved with environmental issues locally and also internationally for a while. He has received, obviously, if he has a long research program, lots of competitive grants from very prestigious institutions. I'm not going to go through that, but some of the more recent recognitions are his participation in and also leadership of National Research Council issues on, again, watershed planning and land use. So with that, what's his title today? Points to Ponder. Well, let's see what Max will offer us and hopefully kick off a very useful and lasting discussion of our future. Thank you, Max.
Thanks, Barry. Well, it's really nice to be with all of you here today and also to kick off this kind of auspicious set of conversations that you're going to have all year. I'm going to try not to talk too long, because I think what I hope will come out of this will be some discussion, some questions. In fact, the title is kind of purposeful to mention points to ponder. I'm really not going to give you my grand vision for the environmental sciences at Cornell, because I'm really thinking about this as a process, as this discussion is part of a process of envisioning what the environmental sciences can and should be at Cornell. So I'll do that. I was grateful to actually have the chance to be here today, because I know Brent was saying all this about how the planetary, it was one day that they didn't have anybody. And so I was really grateful that I was able to plug into the program today. But it's really nice to be here. As you mentioned as Brandon mentioned, in terms of my background, I have a lot of affinities with natural resources as a professor here, and have had for a long time. And so it makes me really grateful to be able to come and talk to you. I'm also kind of humble before you, because I think natural resources is a department that depicts kind of the best in cows. I mean, it's an interdisciplinary unit. It's been ahead of its times in many ways. I'll come back to that in a little bit. It takes seriously the main functions of our college, teaching, research, and extension, in ways that I think play a leadership role for all of the college. And so I'm actually here, and I say that very sincerely, very grateful to be here to have a kind of discussion with all of you. Baron mentioned that I was here. I'm here as a colleague. I'm not here in my administrative capacity today. I don't intend to make any policy pronouncements about the environmental sciences at CALS. But I do want to draw on my experience as an administrator, and in raising some of these questions, I think they've been influenced by some of the things that I've seen them working in the administration. So we're here to talk a bit about envisioning. So I see this as this process of envisioning environmental sciences in CALS, and also where DNR fits into the whole picture as a process. I think it's part of a process of inquiry that we all have. It's a learning process that I think involves multiple interests and multiple perspectives. And I hope we'll come back to that a little bit. I take off from this point, or use this as my starting point, because I don't think environmental sciences is one thing. And I don't think environmental sciences is necessarily a unified program of inquiry. I've come to think of environmental sciences like this. I think it's a complex of methods, theories, and perhaps even ideologies that are oriented towards a systematic understanding of the complex natural world. And then the other part of this that I think is important is the human dimension, and how humans are involved in this complex human nature, or complex natural world, I should say. And then also the thinking about the consequences of human actions in it. And so I think all of that is really encompasses environmental sciences. Now, I also want to ask questions that more concretely and specifically relate to the practice of environmental sciences in the setting of the contemporary university. Even more particularly, I want to pose questions that focus on environmental sciences at Cornell and especially in CALS. The questions that I'm going to pose are the ones that I think we need to address in envisioning environmental sciences in the university setting. Okay? Now today, I want to touch on 4 main themes and a set of questions within each one of those that I think we need to take into consideration when we envision what environmental sciences could be in the university today. The first one is kind of what are the social and economic trends that define or even constrain what we can do in the environmental sciences. And not only what we can do, but how we do it. So that's, I think, a very important point. The other is, what are the major problems to be addressed in the environmental sciences, given the idea that there's such a broad range of things that you can't cover everything, right? And so how do you set priorities? And then how do you set those priorities, keeping in mind the capacity that we have available to address those issues, number one, and number two, the possible development of capacity into the future. That's where the vision might come in. The third one, kind of the breadth or depth of environmental sciences, or what we might say interdisciplinary understanding versus a disciplinary understanding. I want to kind of dwell on that for some time today, because I think when you start to think about how you organize environmental sciences, that's maybe the most central issue that you have to deal with, and it's also the stumbling block in this. And I'll give you a little hint of where I'm going with this, because I don't think that's an either-or question. I think it's one that you need both breadth and depth. And how do you achieve that in the best way in the university? And then finally, I want to come back to kind of where we are. We're situated here in the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences. What's the relationship of the environmental sciences to the CALS mission? And that is of the university as well. Okay, so let me go to this first point about the social and economic context within which the environmental sciences and academic programming more generally take place. I'm increasingly convinced that we're at a historic crossroads where many of the grounding assumptions about the university and academic life are challenged. Certainly the economic crisis is an important constraint, and the preponderance of evidence suggests that we'll face considerable economic constraints in this for some time to come. Of course, Cornell is not exceptional in this respect. Academia in general is feeling the pinch, whether it's from state budget cuts, reduced federal spending, or less philanthropic giving. All the sources of funding are constrained. Political pressures to address long-term national debt are merely the latest episode in a continuing saga, but the recent debates in Washington should make us even more aware that we can expect serious pressures to reduce federal expenditures for research and for higher education more generally. Despite evident environmental problems, in the current political climate, funding for environmental science, research, and other activities is unlikely to grow, and there are compelling reasons to suspect that it will decline. And because the economic crunch is so widely experienced, we can expect the competition for the remaining funds to be more intense. With such economic pressures, universities will likely need to adjust their efforts to place more emphasis on stable, reliable sources of income. In the emerging economic context, undergraduate tuition may become a more prominent source of income. It may be even a source of income growth. That doesn't necessarily mean that education is going to become more accessible to people from diverse socioeconomic backgrounds. There's a recent article in the Chronicle of Higher Education that states the following: the dwindling state support, I quote, comes as applications to many colleges are on the rise. As a result, some public universities are being forced to limit enrollment or raising sticker prices. 11 states have had to cap the number of students matriculating their flagship campuses this year. So there's a crunch here and a curious one where tuition becomes ever more central, and also the ability of people to come to the university becomes more constrained because of more focus on income generation from tuition. With the increased importance of undergraduate tuition in the current economic climate, I expect that universities are going to place greater emphasis on undergraduate education. And I think the same trend may appear at Cornell. But tuition income is not easily directed away from teaching to support research and extension. There's the problem. Thus, in the climate of reduced resources, research and extension will need to be focused in such a way that the university can, with the resources that are available, address the most pressing issues of the day, to remain a relevant voice, if it's going to remain a relevant voice in addressing today's problems. Under these circumstances, program review and priority reassessment is essential. Many priorities that were established long ago and accepted ways of doing things need to be critically examined. We need to take this context into our thinking about the future of the environmental sciences in Cal's and at Cornell, and we need to address questions like these. What are the right resources, both in terms of time and funding, that we bring into our basic functions? What is the right mix of functions? What's the balance between teaching, research, and outreach in this kind of a context? How does the established mix of resources affect our practices? For example, how might the realignment of priorities impact promotion and tenure? For so long, we've emphasized so much getting research grants, research publications. What if those resources are some more constrained? What does that mean in terms of how we think about promotion and tenure? What about teaching out evaluations? Are they going to become less or more important? All of these types of things might have to be considered in this kind of a context. So what's the best way to meet the functions that we are assigned to do? The Chronicle of Higher Education offers some assessment on this, and saying that colleges can innovate even as they streamline their spending, they assert. They go on to say, by experimenting with new technology and emphasizing collaboration among faculty, colleges can pursue both excellence and efficiency. Well, I don't know, that's an open question, and it's one that you all should ponder. These are a few of the questions that come to my mind in just laying out this more constrained economic context in which we live. And that's not going to go away anytime soon. I think we're probably pretty confident in making that kind of dire assessment. So I know you can think of more questions related to this. We'll come back to this momentarily. But now I want to change gear a little bit and talk about some of the major problems to be addressed by the environmental sciences and our local capacity to address them. So let me begin by saying, as you all know and you all agree, there's no shortage of lists of environmental science topics, problems, and challenges. So it would be futile to come up with a comprehensive list. Nevertheless, I think it's important for today's discussion to get a taste of what could fall under the umbrella of environmental sciences. And so one of the things that I did is just look quickly for a couple of lists that might be interesting to look at. So I found this on the web, USGS, list of topics, the usual suspects there. The only elaboration I would make is that environmental issues related to humans, they go on and elaborate that a little bit and talk about human impacts on the environment, land use, health, and disease. We could quibble whether hydrological processes should be separate from water resources and so forth, but by and large, this is kind of a standard list of things. Whether this is as broad a list or as inclusively framed as we would like is really not the question. I just want you to look at this for a moment. Let's think about another list. This is the National Research Council. They put out their 8 grand challenges in environmental sciences. And this is another kind of standard list. I don't think there's anything there that would necessarily, that we would object to. It's a broad list, perhaps not as all-inclusive or even as up-to-date as you might like. But my main point in sharing this list and the other list is not to encourage discussion about the comprehensiveness or accuracy of them, but to ask what topics or challenges should environmental sciences at Cornell University encompass? What are the topics that we're best suited to address? And ultimately, I'll come back to this in a minute, what should be the foci of environmental science topics within DNR. There's been considerable thought invested in answering these kinds of questions about focus and emphasis. The Environmental Sciences Planning Committee that was co-chaired by Marianne Krasny, Evan Cooch was a member of that committee, last year recommended 4 themes that Cornell University Environmental Sciences should focus on: agricultural sustainability, sustainable management of water resources, climate change and adaptation, and biodiversity, biocomplexity, and landscapes. You can see how that falls within some of the lists that we had before. Interestingly, a predecessor report by the Provost Committee on the Environment that included Jim Lasoy, Brian Chabot, Barbara Bedford on that committee, was released in 1991. They released a report in 1991 and identified the following set of themes: characterization and preservation of natural systems, number 1. Number 2, studies of managed systems. 3, studies of stressed systems. And 4, mitigation and minimization of environmental damage. These 2 reports, 20 years apart, present some interesting similarities and differences in recommended program foci. And I think one of the things that I found most interesting about it is how close they were. They both had an emphasis on managed systems or agricultural sustainability. It was roughly the same thing if you translated the terms a bit. Environmental protection was another one. The focus on biodiversity and biocomplexity being kind of the modern terminology. Both focused on climate change. That's kind of an interesting aside, but they were both there. Lots of thoughts has been put into that. But I think the important thing about this is clearly DNR has long been at the center of ongoing discussions on how to focus and frame environmental sciences at Cornell. This experience gives DNR a leg up in thinking about the organization of environmental sciences at Cal and at Cornell more broadly. And it gives it a leg up in thinking about what should be the foci of DNR in moving ahead and contributing to the environmental sciences at Cornell. But I think to think productively about the appropriate foci within the environmental sciences at Cornell, it's important to have a clear idea of the organizational objectives of these kinds of deliberations. To establish these objectives, I think it's important to have a clear notion of what is needed in terms of the breadth and depth of environmental sciences, or the relation between interdisciplinary and disciplinary foci. And that's the theme that I want to turn to right now. Over more than 2 decades, the focus of discussions about the environmental sciences at Cornell has been the creation of an overarching school or center of the environment that encompasses all or most of the environmental sciences. For example, the 2010 Environmental Sciences Planning Committee that I mentioned before recommended the formation of, I quote, a flexible and innovative division of environmental studies that serves as a hub for interdisciplinary research, teaching, and outreach focused on environmental disciplines. The 1991 Provost Committee on the Environment advised the creation of a slightly different entity, calling for, I quote, an integrated university effort built on strengthening programs within core departments, a structure that blends the offerings of the individual programs and provides a milieu for interdisciplinary activities that could not be achieved in other ways. This recommendation, the last one that was made earlier, places greater emphasis on preserving existing programs and departments and is a bit more conservative than the one more recently made of the Environmental Sciences Plan Committee, but it too offers a vision of a fairly comprehensive unit. But I think we need to think critically, and we need to critically evaluate the viability of such all-encompassing approaches, and especially, I think, in light of three important factors. One factor that calls such an all-encompassing approach into question is the economic constraints that we face and that we're likely to face in the foreseeable future. We already talked about that a fair amount. In other words, can we afford an all-encompassing unit in the environmental sciences? The second factor that we must consider is the breadth and complexity of the environmental sciences and the problems that they address. We have to ask, is it realistic to expect that we can successfully organize such a unit? In other words, perhaps more critical words, does such an ambitious goal display a degree of hubris that may be unbecoming of us? Finally, do we have the resources and capacity to aspire to create an all-encompassing academic environmental sciences unit? If not, then we have to ask, what are our programmatic strengths and areas of strategic advantage? Typically, the question of the desirability of an all-encompassing environmental sciences unit is intertwined with the long-recognized need for greater attention to interdisciplinary work. No one disputes that the complexity of environmental phenomena requires inputs that transcend disciplinary lines, and that scientists in a given discipline need to be able to have enough of an understanding of varied disciplines to work productively with a diverse research team. There is also the need to build interdisciplinary capacity, hence the need for undergraduate and graduate level curricula that train new generations of interdisciplinary scientists. The National Research Council concluded in 2001, and I think this still holds true today, that, quote, while innovative departments and institutes have been established at some universities, there are few in the United States. It is still unusual to find a program that trains students in several of the relevant natural science and social science fields, end of quote. That's pretty interesting because DNR sure stands out as a leader in that, and they have been going for a long time. On the other hand, to the side of this, there are compelling arguments in favor of strong disciplinary knowledge. And there's an ongoing tension between the usefulness of well-established disciplinary knowledge and the need for interdisciplinary approaches. I should note that this tension has been apparent in discussions about the organization of environmental sciences at Cornell for a long time. For example, the Provost Committee on the Environment, the 1991 report that I mentioned before, reported this. They say the skills necessary to employ changing technologies and participate effectively in the multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary approaches required for environmental problem solving do not come automatically with the traditional disciplinary training. However, some programs in the foundation disciplines are essential to any coordinated environmental program. The strengthening of interdisciplinary programs must not be at the expense of the basic disciplines on which they depend, and the entire structure will collapse. End of quote. So there was this important tension here all along. It's one that's not easily resolved. An important question that emerges is what are the costs and benefits of interdisciplinary and disciplinary research and training, and what is the most appropriate balance between them? When the question is posed in the way that I have just done, that is, what are the costs and benefits of interdisciplinary and disciplinary research and training, and what are the most appropriate balance, what is the most appropriate balance between them? When the question is posed that way, there's the implication that both interdisciplinary and disciplinary research and training are needed. And if this is the case, then additional questions emerge. What are the scope and limits of relevant disciplinary units? And what are the desirable productive relationships between them? Not collapsing all of them, but developing relationships between them. Now, I want to come back to another point again. At this point, I want to go back to the question of the teaching mission for a few minutes. I think some questions related to the ongoing discussions regarding DNR and SNES undergraduate majors about how best to accommodate the diverse environmental interests of students are important here. In recent years, CALS has seen growing numbers of undergraduate students interested in new majors that cut across disciplines. SNES is a really good example. Our agricultural sciences major is another one. International agriculture and rural development, yet another one. But students also continue to express interest in more established majors, but we don't see much growth in the numbers of students in these areas. Taken together, these observations suggest that student interests are becoming more diverse. If there's a trend towards more diverse student interests across the entire student body, then it's important for us to ask, how can we accommodate diverse student interests in the environmental sciences? And this is another question of kind of the costs and benefits of disciplinary and interdisciplinary approaches. In addition, you have to keep in mind that we're preparing students for a variety of futures in ways that might, for futures that might include graduate study, service as environmental or conservation practitioners, or we might simply be preparing them to be informed citizens with a good environmental understanding. Depending on what the desired outcome is, we might advise students in different ways and offer them alternative curricular options. These considerations raise a number of questions. What are we preparing the students for? What educational options should be offered? How best can we organize our offerings in environmental sciences to meet those students' needs? Are we preparing our students to effectively compete for available employment opportunities? And remember, we might be preparing them for a diverse set of opportunities, not just one future, and all of them be graduate students, for example. Now, I think we can ask similar questions about graduate student training. An additional constraint that strongly influences graduate education is that of funding. And this issue is related strongly to overall trends in the economy and the resources that are invested in the environmental sciences, especially in the coming years. These investments will continue to determine the amount of support available for graduate education and the job prospects for graduates upon completion of their advanced degrees. We need to be thinking about the market for environmental sciences and adjust the size of graduate programs with that factor in mind. Given ongoing changes in academia, industry, and the government, we also need to think about the types of training that graduate students will need to be competitive upon graduation. So you can ask some of these same questions about graduate education. Finally, I want to just touch on the last theme that I had put up at the beginning of my talk, and that is the relation of the environmental sciences to CALS and the university missions. It's important to highlight that environmental sciences are absolutely critical to the CALS mission. The mission is to be the global leader in improving the quality of life around the world by addressing the most challenging issues facing society relating to the environment, life sciences, food, and energy systems, and community economic development. Fulfilling this mission, CALS generates and delivers knowledge with a public purpose through our educational, research, and extension programs that, among other things, promote wise stewardship of the environment and natural resources. Well, that's absolutely central. Environmental science is absolutely central to CALS. This is kind of how CALS is thinking about the college right now. The 4 focal areas you see there: advance the college mission. Environmental sciences is absolutely central. It's a cornerstone of what CALS does. And it contributes to the CALS commitment to promote a more sustainable interface between humans and the environment. Environmental sciences are absolutely key in the broader CALS public purposes of encouraging sustainability. And sustainability being the thing that links all of the different focal areas in the college. In fact, the CALS mission and foci, and especially the environmental sciences, will become increasingly relevant with given population growth, finite natural resources, and the need to protect the environment. So this is going to be absolutely central into the future. Furthermore, CALS recognizes that solutions to pressing societal needs lie in understanding the dynamics of coupling human and natural systems, being absolutely central to the environmental sciences. And it's clear that issues confronting these coupled systems have to be addressed in a holistic manner. Research has to occur in multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary fashions. Policymakers and the public have to be engaged. So the environmental sciences play an absolutely leading role in this holistic approach that integrates research, teaching, and extension to address these global challenges within the context of our land-grant mission, in which where CALS is saying, is generating and applying knowledge with a public purpose. And all of that sounds very familiar to the Natural Resources Department. I don't think there are many open questions about the relationship between environmental sciences and the CALS mission. It's absolutely central. And I think that the question of how DNR wants to take part in framing and shaping the future of environmental sciences is what you need to consider. I think to clarify this role, I think DNR needs to think about the questions that I've raised here this afternoon. So, to conclude, it might be useful to review kind of what some of the questions are that I've raised, and then how they can help DNR determine how it can take part in framing and shaping the future of environmental sciences at Cornell, which I understand to be the ongoing discussion for this year, this academic year. So, wanted to just come back to these themes. The first theme is kind of in the context, the questions relate in the context of the economic and social changes that we face, especially economic constraints, is can we continue to do business as usual? Or do we have to rethink our priorities in some ways? What are the ways that we work in the different functional areas? What are the resources that we contribute to those, including our own time and efforts? And what are the implications of us having to change our foci in any kind of way? What are the implications for how we do teaching and how we evaluate teaching? How we do research? How we evaluate promotion and tenure? These are pretty fundamental questions that could be challenged by the kind of resource constraints that we're facing into the future. The second main thing is kind of how do you determine what to focus on? And this is really a kind of a critical issue for a department like DNR in terms of building its current capacities, its historical successes, but also thinking about the future and what kind of resources and what kind of needs are going to be into the future, and how to address what to focus on to make a continuing contribution to solving environmental problems. And then finally, and I think very centrally, is thinking about the relationship between disciplinary and interdisciplinary approaches. I really come to think that we've always got hung up in trying to say go one way or the other, and try to take an all-encompassing approach to everything. But I really think what we need to do is we need both of these approaches, They serve different purposes, they have different audiences, solve different problems. How do we accommodate all of this in the kind of contemporary setting of the university? I think with all those kind of questions in mind, I think DNR has a lot to ponder. I think it has a future to look forward to, and which includes continuing to be a distinctive unit that provides or contributes productively to the university and to the college. And so I think I'm going to end there. I'd love to have a discussion about how you're going to answer these questions.
Actually, you've done a good job of laying out the central questions. Are we to think that the central administration hasn't preordained some of the answers to those questions? Or can we actually build from a blank slate and figure out what for us is the most appropriate answers to a lot of those things? Where we want the limits of interdisciplinary work to sit, where we want where we want to address each of those questions.
Yeah, I think I can tell you in all honesty, there's no preordained answers to these questions. And I very purposefully didn't want to provide that today because of it. A couple of reasons. One is my vision, I didn't want to preempt the discussions that all of you would have. And secondly, there wasn't, that vision wouldn't have been speaking for kind of the broader college, I think. So I think, yes, I think it's an open question. Now, is it a wide open question? I don't know. And I think the thing that I would come back to is what some of the constraints that I was talking about before. And one of those constraints, is obvious one, is the economic constraints in our present situation in terms of where the university is going. So that constrains the discussion to some extent. The second one is kind of what you have to work with here. You know, what's your starting point? What do you want to build on that's already in place, number one? And number two, what do you want to disengage from, possibly? And so those are tough questions. Those constrain what the possibilities are, I think, in some ways, too. So those are real constraints. But other than that, I think that I think it really is incumbent upon DNR to think, kind of with, let's say, not a completely blank slate, but from, very open position to move forward and think about things in a certain way. I guess the other thing, the reason I was harping so much on this last point and it being so important organizationally is to think about how, I think one of the things we've got, and this is me talking now, Max's opinion, you can disagree with me about that. I think where we've gotten tripped up a lot in discussions over the years, at least the time I've been here, is when we kind of try to come up with an all-encompassing solution of some kind. And I think right now, at least this much I can tell you in terms of how we're thinking, is that there won't be an all-encompassing solution, not a big school or a central. And it's really a time where we're looking to a department like Natural Resources, where it wants to go in the future and how we contribute and really have, and those discussions and visions that come out of the department, I think can have some real impact. So the answer is yes.
As somebody who's not in DNR, as you know, but has been involved in SNES and a little bit in biological environmental engineering, some of my teaching. One of the challenges at Cornell that I always find frustrating is how to integrate, and not at a grand level, as you said, grand department, but then if you don't have that, how do you get something like a SNES program and Department of DNR and BEE, and then things outside the college, which SNES at least incorporates, how do you get them all not working at cross purposes? There, of course, SNES is a wonderful opportunity for the interdisciplinary approach. The department has a mix of disciplinary and interdisciplinary. But one of the problems at Cornell is, because we're so decentralized, is getting that ball to sort of make sense and have everybody on board. And DNR may come up with some wonderful ideas and be viewed as stepping on somebody else's toes. And how do we negotiate that in a way that, in a sense, administration, in a sense, has a role to play. In theory, that's what an administrative system should be able to do, is to make that happen.
Yeah, it's a really good point, because we always want to have all these grassroots efforts, right? And, you know, there is a possibility that they're contradictory or opposing in some ways, and so there has to be some kind of coordination. You know, I think that that is a role for administration. However, the role for administration is not necessarily to dictate what the solutions are, right? It's more to kind of direct the process and to or at least establish a process that everybody can agree on and so forth. You know, and that was really kind of the spirit from which I began, in terms of like not laying out a vision, but a process of envisioning, because I think that's what we have to do. And so I think that for the natural resources, as you have your discussions this year, I think it's going to be a really interesting discussion about what you want to do internally, how you do that internally, but also how you reach out to other units and make the kind of connections that you need to make. And when we had the discussion with the dean, February or January, I mean, that was in fact, you were raising that question. I think that is an important question and a critical one, is precisely that, of how do you make those connections.
So what you outline here, and I know I have struggled with some of my students with the interdisciplinary versus disciplinary focus, because we kind of have both. They struggle with that. We struggle with that. Maybe over the time of a career as a faculty member, you can try to develop 2 or 3 legs, but and we can all fake it that we are really interdisciplinary. But I think there's a couple of examples. Sometimes they're called centers of excellence. Sometimes there are centers that are being put together by just saying, well, you guys need to work together. There's something from the medical and life science where people just created a center. And so we just come in here with a unified approach and bring those people together, and you can do your interdisciplinary stuff. That's obviously not happening at Cornell, given particularly your point number 1. But it strikes me that what you are proposing here would be maybe 2, 4, 3, I don't know, Atkinson centers. Because we all know that we can try to work interdisciplinary, but ultimately we need to have the resources. I think that's where the Center for the Environment at some point fell down, because there was not enough support, ground support, to have that center functioning. You know that, you guys will know that better than I do. I just looked at it from the outside. So maybe the Atkinson model does bring the interdisciplinary teams together, because there is some funding to encourage that, and so people are still rooted in their disciplines. I don't know whether that's something further to consider. It's not a new building, it's not a big school where everybody is coming together and doing that, but the teams that need to solve problems will come together in an inter and multidisciplinary way. I'm not sure whether, but how do we make that happen, given that all the resources are shrinking?
Yeah, let me just jump in there about that. I'm really glad you brought up the Atkinson Center. You know, that in a way is an answer to Joe's question. I mean, that's one facilitating institution that we have that provides some resources for people to get together, as you indicated. And so that's a good thing in terms of making the linkages. I see that as a bit different, though, than what I've been thinking about in terms of how academic units contribute to environmental sciences. I see the Atkinson Center as a kind of facilitating organization, provides resources to people in different units to do things. In some ways, the Center for the Environment is trying to do that in its own way. But I think what's interesting in terms of disciplinary and interdisciplinary and all this in the academic setting is kind of what are your intended objectives or intended outcomes? What are your objectives? Right? What are you trying to will be a unit that encompasses the main functions, in the case of CALS, academic functions of teaching, research, and extension. And so engage in kind of programmatic, systematic efforts to engage in those activities and provide outputs. So those are the academic units. Now, those academic units might have different types of objectives. It might be that you have a unit that's very clearly focused on training graduate students for research careers. In many cases, that could be a very disciplinary focus. You're trying to have a PhD in it, whatever, say sociology, whatever it is. And so then you have a certain set of objectives that go along with it. You train the students at a certain type of research. You have certain types of research outputs that are recognized, publication outlets and so forth. And even on the extension and outreach front, you kind of have certain stakeholders and so forth. Now you can imagine a completely different type of unit like natural resources that is, training people for all kinds of different futures, right? Practitioners all the way to professors and so forth. Different set of objectives. And so they're both valid, both useful, and they both may contribute to the environmental sciences in their distinctive ways, right? And so what I'm trying to suggest or ask is, do we need to have one approach to the environmental sciences, or do we have to have multiple approaches? And then if it's the latter, then what are the various objectives that are addressed in some ways, and then how do we go about addressing those? Right?
Next, I want to come back to your earlier statement about how tuition may become a more prominent part of our business model, if you will, income stream, and what implications that may have. You introduced this issue, but one of the places where it could have some impact is on the arguments being made for new faculty positions. Where historically we've been more focused as a faculty on the research opportunities that a position may be capturing. You're suggesting that we have to sort of raise the profile of the quality of the undergraduate experience. Is that where we are heading?
Well, I think I'll say that I think there's lots of indications that we should be thinking about that, and that we may very well be heading in that direction. I mean, I think if you think about it as the income streams of a business model, then I think that's important. In our college, we're about half tuition based right now, our income, and that's grown over time. I mean, if you look at the trajectory for NIH funding and NSF funding, at least in the short run, and especially in the context of the discussions that are going on in Washington, the likelihood of growth of that kind of funding is not going to go up. If you look at state funding around the country, the states are severely stressed, and they will be stressed for a while. So one of the areas they're coming back are contributions to state universities. And, we're in that boat as well. So if you add all of that together, and you think about a place like Cornell, what's a stable source of income? Well, that is tuition. If we just abstract away from financial aid and all that kind of stuff, right? Because it's more complicated than I'm making it out to be. But if we just abstract that away, then that is at least a stable source of income, and maybe an increasing one. And then if you start to put that in the broader context of universities competing for this resource, the best students in a way, and that some people suggest is important for two different reasons. One is the tuition that they pay, so you want paying students, and you want students that have the wherewithal, or the parents have the wherewithal to pay that. But you also have the kind of people that are going to, in the long run, be very successful financially, so that we can go back and ask them for donations. I mean, this is the most cynical thing you could have ever heard, but it's true. So anyhow, if you think about it in those terms, there's increasing competition for that. And so if you add all that up, it becomes, it points you towards the fact that the student experience becomes very important. And students become a very precious resource. And I can envision circumstances where we're paying more attention to that. Now, I will say, I've been doing some reading on some of this, and you know, some of the pathetic stories you hear about teaching in universities is really dire. I think, I actually, and I mean this sincerely, I think we do a way better job than a lot of places, so that's good. So we have a competitive advantage, but nevertheless, you know, others may try to hone in on that. Yeah, I think that is something we need to think about, is to what extent the teaching becomes more prominent. And that's why I was raising, you know, the whole things of like evaluations and so forth. You know, we're going to have to figure out how we assess whether we're effective as teachers or not. I mean, we already do that, but I think it'll be even more important. So that's a prospect I see, and I mean, I'm open to hearing counter arguments about it, but it's I think there's some suggestive in that case. And Charlie and then Jim.
I'm hopeful that what you suggest will happen at Cornell, that teaching will become important. But I think amongst administrators, we've got to engender something of a semantic change, and that is, while it's important to identify Cornell as a research university, it might be equally important to combine the teaching and research university, and make it very clear that it's a dual mission, in this case, I think, of extension of special case teaching.
Yeah, it's really, and you know, if you think about it that way, and I think that's what you're getting at, Charlie, is this could be an opportunity.
Return to our roots.
Yeah, and I had thought about that in a lot of times, and you know, that this could be something we may want to embrace, right? So, for everybody to talk about, think about. Yeah. Jim, this is
So who do you see as defining the major problems to be addressed? Is it the funders? Is it the students, the parents? Is it the federal government? Is it the state government? Or is it the faculty that you're trying to attract and keep?
Well, I think it's a little of all of that, right? Because I think the kinds of problems that we address are often defined by where the funding is available. So that's the kind of in the crass way, in a way. It's in the research side. On the teaching side, it might be what students were teaching for whom and for what purposes, right? So there's all of that. And then I think, you know, at some ideal level, in terms of all of us as intellectuals and people that are interested in scholarly inquiry, it's the actual problems, right, that we define and pursue. And that's why most of us are here, because we have the freedom to pursue those. But it's all of that, right? And I think that when you start to talk about how you define the foci for a unit like this, realistically, you have to take all of those into consideration, right? It's not just an abstraction, it's got to be something, it's kind of a political thing in that respect, right? Because you're trying to balance between all of those things. It's not easy to do. But I think that it's not easy to do, but I don't think it's impossible. And I think what one needs to do is look at or provide answers to the right set of questions so that you can have a full and comprehensive understanding of what you're actually talking about. Jim and Charlie.
I changed my question about 3 or 4 times, so I'm not sure what I should
I should stop talking
and see what happens. Originally I was having a little trouble getting my head around the financial aspects of this because we have a capped enrollment, right? And so we're not going to get, whether we have the best environmental science program or we're still going to get the same number of undergraduates who are going to be paying the same tuition to, and granted, we'll change the composition of that, and we've seen that in natural resources, adding the SNES major and adding the international agriculture major has cut into the number of students that used to come to natural resources. So I advise more students now than I used to actually. And so, but there's no change in finances. So the issue I have been looking at growth, and I know this is something you're interested in, is it's not in undergrads. It's in a master's, a professional master's program. And as you know, when you review that old document from the dark ages, the proposal was in there for an MEM, a Master's Environmental Management.
Or a lot of familiar stuff in there.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's deja vu all over again. But you know, it was a sound idea then, and I think it's a sound idea now. And as you know, the problem is how do you fund something like that? That's the purview of no single single academic
Right.
department.
You know, so that would be, definitely be a growth area that, you know, we could consider, you know, we've been looking at that. But I think, though, I'll come back to the undergraduate tuition, I'm not so sure that it's, so one thing, I said two things. One, I said that it would be a stable area again, compared to the others that might be falling, so that we can agree on, right? But I also said that it might be an area of income growth. And I think one of the things that you will see is continued growth in tuitions, tuition levels. And that's where it comes in. And that's why I brought up the thing, is that might be a place where there's growth for revenues in a university like that. But then it also kind of calls into question, you know, kind of the public mission that we've got here, right? We are a state school and so forth. The state is giving less money to the college, and how long can we hold on without raising those tuitions? That's the tension, and I think it's a very real one, and that you could imagine that there might be a lot of pressure to pump that up at some point.
And I think that would offer an opportunity, a master's in environmental management, just like the SNES major, for faculty to come together across those kinds of departments and promote some, if they have incentives to do it. And that's what I'm getting at. Is I think our research incentives are there by RFPs. I mean, we work, and I don't see how a unit would, you know, do it. I mean, but in developing curricula, you know, that's something that every department has responsibility for. But the challenge is, how do you do those that fit in between departments? Because obviously our department chairs give priority to core curricula in their own units. And so SNES and International Ag and Rural Development both depend on the sometimes capricious behavior of departments and individual faculty to develop curriculum.
That's an issue. So one of the things that we're dealing with in the college is to how do we incentivize master's programs like the MEM. By the way, I think that MEM is on ice at the graduate school. It could be rejuvenated at some point. And you know, there's a limited time offer available right now for free house. No, we have developed, I think you know about this already, a way of incentivizing programs to take something like that on. And so that, you know, if that discussion starts in the context of DNR, then you should come talk to me, because I would like to talk about that. And that's one I've got my eye on, if that's something that's interesting. And that's a way that some resources could come back to a unit, and it could be to have benefits both for that graduate program, but also possibly for a department. But that's limited time on. No, I would always willing and interested in talking about that.
Well, I think I would agree with the general flavor that I've heard you say, which is let's not assume that some big encompassing thing is going to suddenly make us all work together. Cornell University is already one of the very best universities on the planet for environmental sciences. Let's face it, one of our challenges is simply how we package that and how we get known for that by students who potentially could apply and so on. And so diversity of units and so on, I think is really a correct way to go. But I also was struggling with this idea that economic things constrain us. And I particularly raised my hand because I thought I heard you say something that I violently disagree with. So I want to see if I heard you say this. I think I heard.
Now I'm getting nervous.
Because I think I heard you. I think I basically heard you say that one of the realities of life here is that we define the problems we're working on by where the money is that we can go chase. And in my mind, has historically in American universities been the route to mediocrity at state universities especially, is that they become increasingly defined by where the various pots of money are to go chase, and so we define our questions by those RFPs and those pots of money. I don't think that's the way to make an excellent place. I think the way a university fundamentally determines its future is by choosing faculty. And we should be choosing faculty on the basis of what the major problems of the day are. And if you choose correctly of those two things, you can find the money to get those jobs done. So keeping focused on what the major problems of the day are seems to me to be the principal feature of our responsibilities. And let the money come at that point. So I don't like the idea that we get constrained by the economics of the day and have to decide whom we hire or even how we structure our departments on the basis of where the money lies.
Yeah, that wasn't.
Did I misinterpret?
That wasn't quite what I was saying. I was saying that's one of the things that, I think departments and programs have to take into consideration as they plan for the future. Here's where, I agree with you, and I think especially about the faculty excellence, and also back to what I was saying before about what the ideal thing is to do address the right problems and do the right thing.
And hire faculty that are appropriate for
That's
the
right,
problems
yeah.
of the day.
Now, the only thing though, where I would come back about this and come back to the economic constraints, is that once we've hired people, they're on for the long. And many of us have established kind of research trajectories where we do certain types of things, and at different times, I've certainly experienced this in my own life, what you're doing is hot, and the resources are coming, and it's the right thing to do, and so forth, and at some point, it's not so much, and things change. That does affect us, and I think that's where you have to start to think as a unit about how you reallocate your efforts in some ways. And, that could mean, greater, at the individual level, a movement from research to more teaching, right? And let other people that are kind of dead center do more. I don't know, but that's more the way I'm thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
And that way that the constraints are important, and I think the constraints of especially federal funding are real in these ways. But you're right. I mean, I think that's one thing that we need to think about, all of us broadly in the university, is why are we here and what are we doing? And I think there's some fundamentals about kind of trying to make a contribution. That's why I like the CALS thing, knowledge with a public purpose, because it fits exactly that. What should we be doing, addressing the big problems of the day? But then, once we have a structure established, we also have to be flexible within that to allocate the resources to the greatest effect. And then, those new hires become absolutely critical, because that's where we stay on the cutting edge all the time, I think. I don't know if I danced around it too much.
Yeah, no, I think,
You need to talk? Please go talk. You have the last word in terms of a question.
Oh, God, that question. I was just, I have an observation.
That's fine.
In terms of a lot of discussions we've had, as a faculty, like, it's mostly around how to combine, how to meld, how to do something else. And I was sitting there, it's the first time I've heard in a long time the notion that how do you be the best thing that you can be in your own unit. And in one way, there's some people might be disappointed by that. And the other, another viewpoint that I'm starting to feel right now is almost a relief. A sense of almost empowerment. It's like, so we can be sort of self-determined to an extent about what we think about it. We're not having to worry about 84,000 other things you have to connect with, and we would all this big mass forward. We can't even put our arms around, really. And so there's something sort of releasing about that idea. So I'm not saying that you said that's what we have to do. I don't mean to apply, but it is another way of looking at how we might move forward. That all of a sudden I'm thinking, I think my colleagues, we can work with that. We can make something of that. But you also have one part of that. As part of it, you should go forward, is think about the kinds of relationship building and the mechanisms for that with other environmental science expertise, whether it's units, individuals, or out there to address these major problems that you have as your second point. Because that's how you expand our that's how we think of just appropriately about our department. That's how we expand our capacity. Pursue those linkages. And what we need is administration or whatever that helps facilitate us in those relationships. And that's where the Atkinson Center is.
That's right.
We're doing it through helping us out, groups and fund some things. Jim and others in the center, we're doing that also within the resources they have. I mean, that's not a brand new concept. It's maybe more money than I have or something, but there's a lot of similar. So to me, I'm shocked. It's just like, at the one hand, it's like, we can take another approach. It seems more limited or whatever, but I think it's actually more empowering in some respects. I think we can sort of really figure out how our strengths could be out of this unit, but worry about how to make all the connections that before we can move forward, which is why we have to move forward in years.
Big teams can be parallel.
That's, like, I think, in part, I don't want to give up the bigger vision of impact we might have, but it's like, I think we can figure out a way to have more impact.
Yeah, I think that's really the point I was trying to get at with this thing, is that it's not an either or, you need both. And so, that takes a look away from you a little bit. I think that I would just add a couple of points to what you said. One is definitely the relationship, the linkages, the kind of how you go about it. I still think, though, and I think a big challenge before DNR is to think into the future. And so it's not kind of, what the goal is a few years from now, 5 years, 10, 15 years. Where will this unit be? How will this, what can you do now to make that unit even stronger in that time frame? And that's, I think, a really, and that's part of it exactly, is having a clear hiring strategy. But to do that, you need to know where you're going and what you want and what the needs are out there. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges, and one of the most difficult things is how to do that. And it's also risky, right?
Yeah, I just want to throw in that it's still, I think, frankly, it's a sort of almost a mechanics problem in Cornell faces, but this is an extremely confusing university to students who are potentially thinking about coming here. It still is today. I've interviewed a bunch of them every year because a lot of them are interested in birds. It's a confusing place to figure out. And more students across the U.S., across the world, are interested in conservation-related, environmental science-related things. There ought to be no ambiguity whatsoever that this is one of the great places on the planet for environmental sciences. So I think, frankly, packaging in some way is as big a problem as anything, because the units that are here have a lot of excellent people doing a lot of excellent things. There's a lot of cross-discipline. There's a lot of stuff that isn't broken. What is broken, I think, still, and it's been broken for generations, is how those excellent students that we want to compete for all the reasons that you talked about, why some of them decide not to even think about applying.
Yeah.
That's a real problem.
It's a real problem, and if I'm right about this thing about the increasing emphasis on students in education, then that's even a bigger problem, because we need to get those students, and it is a problem, and I think we have to acknowledge that. And I know you've been having here in DNR strong discussions. SNES have been having discussions about how to consolidate those majors. This fits exactly into that, because we're just too complicated. This is just Cal, let alone the whole university, right? We're just too complicated, and it's really hard for students to navigate where to go. And so, yeah, and I think maybe if some of what I said was true, this question becomes even more important.
Max, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.